But moving forward, he was shot 7 times. There was huge outrage. As I said before, the headlines read, "White officer shoots unarmed black man." There were protests in the street. They were calling for the officers' jobs. They were calling that the officers go to prison. And now that the details are out, there's crickets.
Yo, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the It's Needed podcast, where we discuss real issues involving law enforcement in the community. It's your boy Ryan Tillman, founder of Breaking Barriers United, and I'm joined today by the light-skinned wonder himself, Mr. Oh No, it's the Popo. What's going on,
Yes,
buddy?
sir. Hey, I was trying to get the Stone Cold Steve Austin intro so I could play it. You caught me 2 seconds shy.
Hey, bro, you too late, bro. You too late.
Story of my life.
I'm gonna need you to be quicker.
Story of my life.
And we are joined today by the savage himself, Mr. Stuckman. I'm using his last name because on the last episode he didn't like me using it. So we are joined by Billy. What's going on, Brody?
Nothing much, man. Good to see you.
Billy still thinks that Uncle Sam is right outside of our door, about to just take him in.
Billy still got rid of chicken, so I'm not talking to Billy right now. Couple more weeks, and then Billy might be alive to me.
Hey, today's one has to go might divide some people. So
they've been dividing people. So if this one's worse, I don't even know if I'm ready.
Hey, it's funny. I had a whole bunch of people texting me last night. Remember Derek and Shalisa Williams? They text me separately, and they were like, "Gummy's got to go." So, yeah.
I forget what was the other ones.
Your
Gummies,
chips, popcorn.
Yeah, chips, popcorn.
Cookies.
Yeah, and cookies. So, but yeah, people are listening. So we appreciate you guys all participating in the One Has to Go. Continue to send us your feedback on Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is, because we like to hear what you guys are thinking out there. So,
yes,
let's jump right in. We have a deep dive that we're going to do today, and sometimes deep dives take a lot of time. The last deep dive we did was Breonna Taylor, and so this week we're going to do Jacob Blake. Before we get to Jacob Blake, though, I do want to thank you guys for tuning into last week's episode. We had a tremendous amount of feedback from last week's episode when we discussed the Capitol and everything that was going on. Got some good messages from my chief, my captains, and some other people. And I think one of the highlights was people just saying that, we were a voice for those that feel like voiceless right now. And I think I was talking to AJ throughout the week, and I think that's what continues to motivate me to do this podcast, is that, we are really a voice for people that really can't say much. And so we appreciate you guys for tuning into that. Any new current events on your end, AJ, before we hop into the deep dive?
No, but just to touch on that a little bit more, if you're listening to this and you have info, or maybe you have something that you would like us to share with the world, really feel free to shoot us a message. Hop on Instagram, the It's Needed page, hop on Facebook, the It's Needed page, shoot us a message. We will get back with you. It might not be immediately, but we will get back with you. And hopefully we can work that out.
Boom. There it is. So today what we're going to do is we are going to hop into a deep dive of why the Cleveland Browns and Ohio State Buckeyes
here
lost.
We go.
Hater. I just played. I went off script right there.
Hey, we gave you LeBron. I'm just saying. We gave you LeBron. A kid from where?
Oh, did I say the Cleveland Cavaliers? I meant the Cleveland Browns. Did I say the Cleveland Browns?
No, you said the Browns, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Cleveland Browns, they lost. Ohio State Buckeyes, they lost.
Who's your football team?
Don't worry about all that. Just know that we both watching the Super Bowl from the sidelines together.
But who made it the furthest?
Don't matter.
Oh,
You only got one. It ain't. You can only have one.
General question.
Hey, Talladega Nights. You're not first, you're last. So
not if you a Browns fan. We was celebrating, boy. And I'm a Cowboys fan, so.
I didn't know you was a Cowboys fan.
Yeah, I've been a Cowboys fan, but my secondary choice is the Browns.
Oh my goodness. So, but on a real note, we are going to do a deep dive, and what we're going to do a deep dive on today is Jacob Blake, and so. A couple weeks ago, the officer that was charged, or initially believed to be charged in killing Jacob Blake, and they're going to try him for manslaughter, whatever it was, no charges were filed against him, which I remember when Jacob Blake initially happened, I kind of assumed that was the lines that this investigation was going to go. But now that we know all the facts and information that's has circulated and come out around this, we can discuss it. And so the whole purpose for us discussing this is simply to educate you all on really what happens after a critical use of force like this in the field of law enforcement. Because and what we're going to title this podcast today is After the Dust Settles. The reason we're going to call it that is because what happens when all the dust settles? And sadly, think about how much unrest happened when Jacob Blake initially happened. Bro,
Yep.
like the protests, the rioting. I mean, granted, it came on the heels of George Floyd and some of the other ones,
Right.
but there was just so much protest. And then when they found out that no charges were going to be filed against the officer, crickets, which is
Yep.
great. That's great. But at the same time, it's one of those things like people can't even really say much because, they realized the officer's actions were deemed right. But yet we've already done all the damage. So you can't go back and rebuild the buildings that you burned down. You can't go back and take away your shoulder injury that you got. You can't go back and, remove some of the violence that we've done on our streets. You can't go take that back. And so what happens when the dust settles? So let's get into it. AJ, I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of take it off if you want to lay the groundwork or the framework. And then, what the heck is that,
absolutely.
bro?
So I'll give you the backstory real quick for those of you who don't know, or maybe you just want like a quick refresher. So on August 23rd of 2020, the police were called from a female. The female was pretty frantic, and she said that Jacob Blake, she said him by name, is here. He's trying to take a rental car that is in my name, and he has warrants. So the officers ran Jacob Blake's name, whether it was name, date of birth, social security. Anyway, they found out who he was. They ran him and found out that he had felony warrants. He had warrants for sexual assault, criminal trespass, and I think another one, which I can't think of right now. But at least one or two of those warrants were felony arrests. The officer verified the warrants, basically saying that, yes, the warrants are still good. We want him. They show up. Keep in mind, the female who called the police was the victim of these crimes. So the sexual assault, the criminal trespass, the female who called was the victim of these crimes. So the officers had that knowledge as well going into it. Okay, the female who he sexually assaulted in the past is there. She's the one who's calling. He's trying to take the car. Officers show up. Yep.
Before you move forward, what I want to do is I want to break down that standard approach because I want to school you guys, if you're not in law enforcement, on kind of how it works. When officers go to a call for service, usually our dispatch is trying to gather as much information about what they're going to, so they already have information before they even get on scene about who's all involved. And so what AJ said is they had knew Jacob Blake's name, either because of the person that was calling gave it to him, and I'm sure I know they had a history with Jacob Blake in the past. And so typically when you know who is at the scene that you're going to, what your dispatch is going to do is they're going to conduct a records check of you, so that way we can get a little bit more information about you. So the information that they got was Jacob Blake had an active warrant for his arrest, and they saw all of his other criminal, at least his local criminal history. And what I mean by local is anything that's specific to that area, that city. A lot of times you start to develop your own, I don't like to call it a rap sheet because it's not a rap sheet, but it kind of works like a rap sheet. You get your own rap sheet in that city that basically says, hey, these are the amount of times he's been arrested. This is what he's been arrested for and all this other stuff. And why is that important to know is because now as officers, we start to paint a picture of what we are going to be dealing with when we go out there. So when officers show up on scene, it's not like they just get there and like, oh, we got a random person. We don't know anything about him. We're just going to start fighting with this dude. No, when you go there, it starts to create a mindset. And at the end of this podcast, we're going to talk about the importance of mindset and how it goes into the decision-making process of what we do to use force. Go ahead, AJ.
And that's good to mention, just because I know when this incident originally happened, people were bringing up Blake's rap sheet, like his prior convictions. And there was kind of some back and forth, like, well, that shouldn't matter. Yes, it should. And just to give you a little bit more perspective, we do change our approach in how we handle situations based off of that rap sheet. If we're approaching a convicted murderer who has felony warrants, we may approach that a little bit different because he or she has already shown what they're capable of or who he or she really is. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about something like that. this. So just to continue with the story, officers show up, they identify Mr. Blake. I don't want to call it a scuffle, but they try to take Mr. Blake into custody. And this is where the video starts right there or shortly after that a lot of people see. During this, we'll just use the word scuffle, right? During this attempt to gain control of Mr. Blake, he was tased 2 separate times, meaning that an officer pulled their taser out and attempted to tase him, shooting prongs into his body to gain control of him. At one point, Jacob Blake ripped the prongs out. They were grabbing onto him. He made it around the front of the said vehicle, or there was a vehicle there with his kids in the back seat. We'll just say what the video showed, and then we'll kind of break down what happens. He makes it in the door jam, kind of leans in the car. The officer's grabbing him. 7 shots are fired, or maybe multiple shots are fired. I think Jacob Blake was shot 7 times from there. He ended up being paralyzed, spent some time in the hospital. The headlines read, "White officer shoots unarmed black man," and it really threw gasoline on this already raging fire that came from the heels of the George Floyd incident.
Perfect foundation for it. So now that we kind of know what we're dealing with, let's go into the deep dive part of it. So I just brought up something a few minutes ago about this whole mindset. And mindset is probably one of the most important things or determining factors of whether or not an officer is going to be charged and prosecuted versus whether or not they're not. And the reason mindset is so important is because your mindset, an officer's mindset, actually goes into why they actually chose to utilize the level of force that they did. In this case, it was a firearm. And so let's start talking about from the time, like I said, where the officers received this radio call and what they're going to and why that's so important. And so I'll discuss first, and then AJ, you can chime in. But it's important to understand how an officer's mindset starts getting shaped from the moment they get that call for service. The moment you get a call for service and understand what you're going to and then who's also involved is the moment you already start to conjure up how you might respond or what kind of level of force you may or may not use against a person just simply based off of talking to them. The times we don't have this advantage of doing is if an officer is ambushed, because an ambush is when you catch somebody completely off guard, completely by surprise. And so that initial response by an officer is really going to be, how prepared were they for an ambush, as best prepared as you can be. That's what their initial response is going to be. But when you actually have information as to something you're going to start thinking and developing up a plan, conjuring up a plan, as you should. You shouldn't be going there. You shouldn't get there and say, okay, now I'm going to try to figure out what I'm going to do. No, you should already start in your mindset, start thinking about what you're going to do. So domestic disturbance, probably one of the most dangerous call officers go to. So you got to take those things into consideration as well. If a domestic disturbance is probably one of the most dangerous calls that an officer is going to go to, along with certain other calls, but if that's one of the most dangerous ones, coupled with somebody that you're going to be on scene with that has a propensity to use violence against officers and other people, sexual assaults and things like that, what do you think your mindset would be? Let me ask you, Billy, because I want to ask the non-officer first, and then Billy, and then AJ, I want you to chime in. But Billy, if I told you to go handle a call, and the person that's going to be there when you get there, the suspect, or potentially he may or may not be a suspect, but the person that's going to be there has fought officers in the past. He was arrested, 3 or 4 months prior for sexual assault. And he, has known to carry weapons. What is your mindset when you're going to that?
Well, you're going there, I guess, almost expecting that he's going to resist, and with your guard up.
Okay.
So the moment I start seeing aggression, it might make me jump a little bit faster because I already know he's done it before.
Wow. So there it is. As opposed to somebody with not knowing anything, doesn't mean you're not going to be on guard, but you're going to be least expected of it if you don't really know any other prior knowledge.
I'd like to think like I would give the benefit of the doubt to the people I'm coming up to. If I don't know anything about them, okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be agreeable, or at least talk with me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Got you. Go ahead, AJ.
Yeah. I think it's important to really just restate that Jacob Blake had priors for attempting to flee and resisting. So you're absolutely right. If you combine these priors, okay, this individual is known to flee from officers and known to fight with officers, which is the resisting aspect of it. Then you add in the fact that it is one of the most violent and dangerous runs a police officer could go to. Meaning that, you're going to a domestic violence situation. Officers are trained in the academy that, hey, you don't go to these by yourself. You go with two officers, at least here where I work. You do. And the department I worked prior to this, you responded to these two officers at a time because they're known to be volatile and very dangerous for officers. And then the fact that he has active felony warrants, you would definitely approach this situation a little bit different than you would just your average call.
Absolutely. So let's get into the part now where officers get there. They have this prior knowledge of what they're dealing with, and they see Jacob Blake, and now they go into detain him. So I'm going to use the word detain, even though they knew he had an arrest warrant. So let me give you guys a little bit of knowledge about this. There are calls that I'll go on, and I know somebody has an active arrest warrant for them. When I go to put handcuffs on them, I may not be arresting them right away. I may just be going to detain them by putting handcuffs on them, just simply so that way I can talk and do my investigation. But if I know this person has a tendency for violence, I can go ahead and put handcuffs on him without actually arresting him right away. And so I arrested somebody this past week for something, and he was like, "You're violating my rights. You're violating my rights. You never even read me my Miranda rights." So I was like, "Sir, do you know that the only time I have to read you your Miranda rights is that if I'm going to interrogate you after you're in custody?" Because there's two things that you need in order to read a person their Miranda rights: custody and interrogation. Those are the two things you need. That's where Miranda rights go into play. And so, Billy, I see you looking at me because it's probably you're learning something from it. But like, one of the things that people don't get, or one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, well, the officer never read me my Miranda rights. Well, an officer doesn't need to read you Miranda rights if they're not going to interrogate you. The only time they need to read you your Miranda rights is if they're going to interrogate you after you've been taken into custody. They don't have to read your Miranda rights.
Can they, like, let's say you arrest someone, bring them in, can someone else read them to them then, or does it have to happen during the arresting?
They can move you. They could do. I took a person all the way to jail. The only way a place of Miranda rights comes into play is like if I arrested you for murder right now, I can, and I know you, and I believe you did it. I have probable cause to believe that you committed a murder right now. I could place handcuffs on you, take you all the way down to the jail. As long as I don't talk to you or interrogate you about that murder, I never have to read you Miranda rights. Ever. Unless you're a juvenile. Juvenile, at least in California, is a different story. But if you're an adult, now if I wanted to ask you about that murder after I took you into custody, then I need to read your Miranda rights.
So then could they technically not even read those rights to you until the interrogation, right before they start it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That happens all the time.
I mean, we take people to jail all the time, and they never have their rights read because we don't interrogate them or ask them about the crime.
So have both of you done that before?
Yeah. You watch First 48. You see them, they'll put them on ice, meaning like they'll arrest somebody for a murder, put them on ice, let them sit for like 2 or 3 hours just to think about what's going on, just that whole psychological. Then you'll see them walk in the room, and before they start their interrogation, they read them Miranda rights.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So, but the reason I brought that up is because with Jacob Blake, they're trying to detain him at least. They could be potentially trying to arrest him, but we know for a fact they're trying to detain him, meaning they want to put handcuffs on him. Why is that important to know? Is because anytime I know I'm going out with a volatile subject or has shown a propensity to be volatile or dangerous or whatever it may be, I might try to go handcuffs right away until I know for a fact that we're all safe and we can talk about this. And I always tell people all the time, like, hey, just as fast as the handcuffs go on, I can take them off just as fast. You know what I mean? And the reason that's important to notate is because this is like, if I know Billy is dangerous and I know I have to investigate a crime, but I know in the past he's fought me and everything like that, I'm going to say, hey, do me a favor, boss. Let me search you, make sure you don't have any weapons, put handcuffs on you. I'll say, hey, Billy, just so you know, you're not under arrest. All you're doing, you're simply just being detained. Not under arrest, simply being detained. I just need to go ahead and figure out what's going on, who's who in the zoo right now, so we can work from there. If you're complying with me, hey, no problem, boss. I understand this, and that. That's when I start to determine whether or not how I'm going to do this interview. how are you going to fight? Because that's the first test, essentially. When I tell you to turn around, put your hands behind your back, if you're somebody that wants to fight me, you're probably going to be really showing that aggression a little bit more earlier, because now I know, like, hey, look, I'm trying to fight. But if you start complying right off the bat, okay, I know, okay, he's complying. Test number one, he's passed test number one. And so this is important to notate for this Jacob Blake, is because when they are trying to detain him, the fight is on. They are scuffling. Go ahead.
And before we dive into the details of what transpired during that fight or scuffle, whatever you want to call it, I just want to read something and then explain it to you really fast. I pulled up a use of force continuum sheet, and I know for a fact that this one is used at a major city, a major department that has thousands of officers. And what this is a guide that police officers use to utilize force. Before I dive into the details of this, let me break down two things. The first of which is the officer/subject factors, meaning that these can sway this use of force continuum. Age, sex, size, skill level, multiple subjects/officers are relative strength. Meaning if you show up and there's 20 bad guys or 20 people, you adjust accordingly. Mm-hmm. If you show up and you know this guy's a professional boxer or a UFC fighter, you adjust accordingly. The second thing is special circumstances. Closeness to a weapon, injury or exhaustion, being on the ground, distance from the subject, special knowledge, availability of other options, and subject being handcuffed. So now I'll explain the continuum just before we go into this, because I know that there may or may not be questions on why the officer did what he did. If me being a police officer, Ryan is under arrest or I'm detaining him, I'm legally detaining him. If I grab onto him and he pulls away from me, I can mace him, I could take him down, I could use joint manipulation or peer pressure. Those are on the same playing field as what he did. Depending on the circumstances, I could jump up a notch as well, which means I could what? I could strike, punch, I could strike muscle groups, baton restraints, or electrical devices. So a lot of people think when they see uses of force that we have to be on the same playing field, meaning if a subject strikes an officer with a fist, that we have to strike that subject back with a fist. And that's not how it is. So I just kind of want to debunk that myth. If you ball your fist up and I know you're going to strike me, I could punch you first. If you start punching me, I could tase you. If you pull out a weapon, I'm going to pull out my weapon. So I wanted to put that out there before we dive into what really transpired during this altercation.
Exactly. And so now that we know, so again, we know the call for service. We know why officers were there. We know that officers were attempting to detain and or take Jacob Blake into custody. One of the factors we have to consider, did Jacob Blake know that the officers were attempting to take him into custody? Now, why is this an important factor to know? Now, there's case law that says when feasible, an officer needs to give some type of use of force warning to that person. And what they mean by when feasible, meaning like, for example, if Billy walks in the room and he reaches underneath his shirt and pulls a gun out or something like that, and I don't have time to perceive that threat right away, I just respond to the threat. I didn't have time to give Billy a warning and says, hey, stop, or force is going to be used against you. I didn't have time to do that. So that's what it means by when feasible. So when officers get there in Jacob Blake's case and they're attempting to detain him, well, now all of a sudden the fight is on, and he's, according to his interview, is saying he's trying to get away and walk away. Now, this begs the question. If officers are trying to stop, if an officer puts his hand on me, I have to ask myself the cautious question, am I going to try to fight with him? Regardless, whether or not, because in his own words, he said, I didn't think I did anything wrong, therefore I was going to walk away from the situation and leave. Is that the right mindset a person should have? And I'm going to say no. Here's why. The reason that's not the right mindset to have is because in your mind, you don't believe you did anything wrong. But do you know what the officers are thinking? Unless you know exactly what the officers are thinking, why they're there, and what they're coming to, you can't make that determination of whether or not you didn't think you did anything wrong, so therefore I'm going to leave. Because the officers have a job and a duty to investigate the circumstances. Therefore, in their mind, you could be involved in that investigation, meaning you will be detained until they figure out otherwise. So just because you don't believe you did anything wrong, that doesn't mean you could just freely walk away and just say, hey, look, I'm not dealing with it. You know what I mean? If an officer gives you an order to stop or do whatever, then you got to do it. And then that's when you tell them, hey, I did nothing wrong. Then you prove to them, hey, I did nothing wrong. I did this, whatever it may be. And then they can say, okay, you know what? You did nothing wrong. You're on your way.
And it's also important to note that once an officer identifies someone with an active warrant, they have to arrest them, let alone if it's a felony warrant. They have to arrest that person, meaning no matter how bad you fight, no matter how fast you run, it is our job to do everything in our power to take custody of you per the judge, right? So for those of you who don't know, a warrant is a court-ordered document to take that person into custody in order for that person to see a judge. So meaning a judge signed off on this warrant. Yep. He's got a warrant for his arrest. Clerk of court, someone with power signed off on this warrant saying, I need to see this individual, take them into custody. So this isn't a game where, officer shows up, you have a warrant, you're like, I don't want to go to jail. And we're like, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. We have to take you into custody if you have a warrant for your arrest.
Yeah. And so that being said, so now Jacob Blake is fighting with officers. He's resisting, and now officers are trying to take him into custody. They deploy a taser twice. Now, watching the interview of Jacob Blake, he says that he still didn't realize that he did something wrong, which is why he was not complying with the officer's instructions.
Mm-hmm. So tell everybody what interview you're referring to, so they could cross-reference or do whatever.
Yeah. Michael Strahan actually interviewed him. And so I watched the interview, and during that interview where he's being interviewed by Michael Strahan, he says clearly, like, hey, look, even though I was being tased or whatever, I still didn't think I did anything wrong, and I didn't realize they were trying to take me into custody. Now, this is where a level of common sense has to come into play. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all about common sense, but specifically when it comes to stuff like this, and if you're one of those people that was angry when you saw Jacob Blake get shot and all this other stuff, I want you to ask yourself the question, if somebody an officer is attempting to tase you, what do you think they're trying to accomplish? Do you think that they are trying to take you into custody and trying to get you to stop? Or do you just think that they randomly just deployed a taser against you and just for no reason? Even if it was for no reason, even if you truly believe that they deployed a taser for no reason, are you just going to keep doing what you want to do? Especially twice, because they deployed it twice and he took the prongs out. And last time I've seen somebody take prongs out, I knew they were under the influence of drugs and things like that, which also goes into the officer's mindset, which we'll get back to in a second. But even so, let's just say they deploy a taser twice at you. If we are really living in the fear that we claim to be living in for police officers, why would you continue to resist if you are that afraid to lose your life? And in the words of Jacob Blake, he even said, I was afraid of what the officer was going to do to me. Well, if you're afraid of what the officer is going to do with you, why are you making the situation worse by continuing to fight those officers?
Mm-hmm. And just to touch on that video where Michael Strahan interviewed Jacob Blake a little bit more, he kind of contradicts himself. And once again, you could cross-reference this with the video and, do your own research. And we actually encourage you to do that because he said he didn't know what they were there for. But then towards the end of the interview, he made a statement that was, I was going to put the knife away and then lay down and put my hands on the ground. Like I was going to sprawl out on the ground, insinuating he was going to give up because he knew that he was under arrest. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just, since we're talking about that portion of it, then I figured I would put that right there.
No, perfect. So he's fighting the officers. They deploy a taser twice. Taser's ineffective. Now, as officers, going back to the mindset, Taser is a very effective tool. I've been tased twice. I know when it works. I know how it works. I know in cases when it doesn't work. In some of the cases that it doesn't work, there's a couple possibilities. One of the possibilities that the prongs didn't make a solid connection. Meaning
So
it didn't penetrate
explain
the
what that
clothes.
means.
Yeah, so in the Taser, there's two little metal prongs that fling out. They look like fish hooks. If you make a solid connection, they basically penetrate your skin, attach, and then when they attach, there's two prongs. One hits you up on your upper extremities, your lower extremities. It basically creates a line of electricity that incapacitates you. Is usually about 50,000 volts of electricity. And so if one of the prongs doesn't penetrate your skin, and let's say somebody shot a taser at me, one hit my chest and the other one hit the wall. Well, that's not there's not a line of the way electricity works, the conductors, it works on a straight line, and so therefore that line of electricity won't affect me because there's not a line. That line is broken up, I guess you can say. And I could be wrong as far as the science behind it, but generally speaking, that's kind of how it works.
Loose fitting clothes, jackets, like thick jackets, like the bubble coats, are all things that could cause those to not go all the way
to run
through and work properly. Yep.
The second reason I've seen it is sometimes a person may be under the influence of narcotics, and for whatever reason, sensories are turned off, whatever it may be, but that person is not affected by the taser as a normal person would be. And so I've actually seen that happen a couple times. And so why is this information important to know when thinking about it is because it also goes into the mindset. So let's continue to build this officer's mindset. So you have an officer responding to a domestic disturbance dispute. That's check number one. Okay, I'm going to priority 1 type call. 2, the officer's mindset is I'm going to a call where I know that there's a person there that's known to have a tendency of violence towards officers and other people. So another check mark. 3, when officer gets there, they try to detain / take this guy into custody, and now he's refusing to submit to their commands or whatever. And so that's mark number 3 is like, hey, this person is not going with the program. 4, officers attempt to utilize the less lethal option in order to detain him / take him into custody, which is a taser, and they deploy it twice. He actually takes the prongs out, and that's actually been proven in the investigation. So that's 4. So the reason I bring those things up is because now what I mean by saying check number 4, you're seeing that this slow progression of this officer's decision making is going up. Because he knows now these are all different contributing factors that are making this person very, very dangerous. Mm-hmm. So, go ahead, AJ.
And keep in mind the use of force continuum that I explained earlier. Picture a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid is like officer presence, pushing or pulling officer. Talking. And then at the very top of the pyramid, at the point, is deadly force. So I think it's safe to say that the officer is slowly working his way up this pyramid, right? Like he's trying to gain custody at the bottom. He's trying to gain custody in the middle, and we're slowly working our way up.
So now that we have that, during the interview as well as the investigation, there was mention that there was a weapon involved, and there was a weapon. There was a knife. Jacob Blake actually mentioned he had a knife, said he carries a knife, and they actually found that knife later. Excuse me. They actually found that knife. Sorry. Coronavirus. So they actually found that knife later. So Jacob Blake says he dropped his knife. He was going to pick the knife up off the ground. Now, let's pause right there.
There. So what he said is I dropped my knife and realized it and then picked it back up.
So you were out with police officers. They're trying to apprehend you. You're scuffling. You drop a weapon on the ground. Are you going to pick up a weapon with police officers, especially if you're afraid of what they might do?
Yeah. And we're not talking about like like your random weapons, like a bat or like something random. We're talking top 2, right? There's a gun, and then there's what? A knife.
So the officers clearly saw this knife. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you are in the shoes of the officers, what is your mindset at this point in time? You're dealing with somebody that's not going with the program. He's fighting us. He's pulled prongs out of my taser. He's reaching for a deadly weapon. now you're starting to get up into that red zone. Like, hey man, this is escalating quickly. So Jacob Blake starts to walk away from these officers, and as he's walking away from the officers, the investigation shows, according to the officer statement, he heard I'm believing it's the reporting party, which is probably Jacob Blake's baby mama, say, "My kids are in the car and he has the keys to my car." So if I tell anybody that without going into anything further, if you're the officer on scene, you hear somebody says, "My kids are in the car and he has the keys to my car," what is your initial thought or reaction? Billy, what would you think?
Well, worst case scenario would be he gets in the driver's seat and takes off, and now you're in a car chase with kids in the car.
So he's kidnapped your kids, right? That's kidnapping would classify as a very, very dangerous, violent crime.
Yes. Yeah.
That's up there.
Yes. I mean, murder,
kidnapping,
rape,
carjacking,
kidnap. Yeah, they're all up there. Yep.
So now let's talk about the Graham versus Connor factors. Now, in this case specifically, an officer can utilize reasonable force when effecting an arrest. So they're trying to effect an arrest of Jacob Blake, overcome some resistance. So they're overcoming his resistance because he's already been shown to overcome resistance, or to prevent his escape. He is running away from them. So now he is escaping. So that's all three Graham factors checked off the board right there in a short period of time.
And for those of you who are listening who may not be in law enforcement, what Ryan is talking about is the case law in which governs law enforcement nationwide in utilizing force.
Yep. And to go along with that case law of Graham versus Connor, there's also a 3-pronged test to the type of force to be used against Jacob Blake. And so things to consider was the suspect actively fleeing or resisting? He was. The officers were trying to prevent his escape. And the last thing is, they were trying to overcome his resistance. So he matches the 3-pronged test, if you ask me. So why would you ask, is that important to understand? Is because that's what law is. That's what governs law enforcement use of force. And so when he goes around that car and he reaches into the car, that officer now has to make a split-second decision. And when I talked at the very beginning of this podcast about the mindset of an officer and making a rapid decision, all of those different factors, and there's probably way more. This is just what we know. This is not taking into account what he's feeling and all this other stuff. What we know is all of these things came to play before he decided to pull that trigger on that gun. And when he reaches in that car, he has to make a split-second decision. Is he going to stop this? Is that person an imminent threat to him? And is that person an imminent threat to other people? That officer, is safe to say, believed he was an imminent threat to himself because of the knife, as well as the children in that car. And he's already shown that he is not listening to the officer's commands.
Yeah, and the officer also stated that while Jacob Blake was entering the vehicle, that he turned and lunged towards him with the knife. So, the officer did what he had to do and responded with deadly force. And just to kind of put things into context a little bit further, just because I feel like there may still be some people out there who are kind of on the fence. Can you imagine if you called the police on someone who had a warrant? So the police officers show up, the person's kind of scuffling with officers. Your kids are in the car and you tell the officer, "Hey, my kids are in the car. He has the keys. Don't let him leave with my kids." And this guy gets in the car and leaves and crashes and your kids are dead. Don't you think that you would have wanted the officer or officers to do a little bit more to make sure that this person does not leave with your children? Just kind of to put things into perspective and give you a little bit more outlook on what the officer may be thinking, going into this situation. But moving forward, he was shot 7 times.
Yep.
There was huge outrage. As I said before, the headlines read, "White officer shoots unarmed black man." There were protests in the street. They were calling for the officers' jobs. They were calling that the officers go to prison. And now that the details are out, there's crickets. But I wrote down a few questions because I know, just judging from the past, that these questions will come up. So I'll ask you one, Ryan, then I'll answer the other one. And then we'll just kind of move forward from there. Ryan, why did the officer not shoot him in the leg or shoot the knife out of his hand?
Great question. So, one of the things that also came up is why did he shoot 7 times? If not, I know he was struck 7 times, but if not more. You got to realize is that when a situation is evolving so rapidly like that, it is very difficult, one, to shoot a target, that's standing still. You know what I mean? So now you're considering somebody as a moving target. It's very difficult to put effective rounds on target. Secondly, you got to realize is that when your adrenaline is pumping that much, it doesn't take much to pull the trigger of a firearm. And if you've, in your mind, made up a decision as somebody is an imminent threat to yourself or somebody else, the idea that, hey, I'm going to shoot my gun one time and then let it be done is kind of hard just because your mind doesn't even work that fast to realize what you've done. I think they say you have a second and a half to perceive something and a second and a half to react to something. You know how many rounds that you can fire off of a gun in a second and a half? You can fire a lot of rounds off in a second and a half. So by the time you've actually, and there's force science that goes into this notion that actually says, by the time you've actually realized you pulled the trigger on your gun, you've already probably fired a few rounds off. And so that whole notion that, oh, they could have shot him one time or shot him in the leg, your mind is still trying to wrap its head around or the idea like, oh shoot, I gotta fire this firearm right off before you actually realize you even fired the gun. And so that's why it's not ideal to say, hey, look, a person's going to shoot somebody in the leg because you can't even, you're already having a difficult time enough to make the decision to pull the trigger, yet alone to look and aim at a leg. It'd be different if I was a sniper on a building, 300 feet away, 300 yards away, and I'm just looking in the scope, aiming at this person's leg. That's different. But if I'm in a rapidly evolving situation, it's already hard enough to wrap my head around the idea like, man, I gotta utilize deadly force. The other thing is going back to the rounds that were used and stuff, it's just, it happens so quickly that your adrenaline is largely causing you to fire off as many rounds as you decided to do. So to pull back somebody, I look at it like this. When I think I've used this analogy before, but when I golf, one of the hardest things in golf is what like I know when I'm making a bad swing, but I can't pull myself out of that. Like I automatically, like if I start my swing and I know it's a bad swing, my mind can't catch up to my actions of what I'm doing, and therefore I'll make that bad swing and make a terrible shot because I couldn't pull out of it. And the first thing I always say is, man, I felt it was bad when I was swinging. And baseball, there's a lot of other things like that too.
Yeah. And just for a little bit more clarification, we don't shoot to kill. We shoot to stop the threat. Meaning if you're trying to stab me, I'm going to shoot you until you stop trying to stab me. If you're trying to do whatever I'm trying to stop you from doing, I'm going to shoot until you stop doing whatever that is. So just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, there were kids in the back seat of that car. There were people outside of the car and in the front of the vehicle. And I think there might've been one person, on the sidewalk as well. So the officer has to account for those rounds, meaning I'm not going to try to shoot you in the leg. I miss, it skips off the ground and it hits the person on the sidewalk. We aim for center mass for a reason. It's a big target. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's going to slow down the bullets and whatnot. We have to account for those rounds. So those were two questions. Ryan said the second one I was going to ask, which is, why'd they shoot him 7 times? Officers are reacting to what's going on. Just to give you a personal story of mine, I was involved in a shooting as well. And they asked me after my shooting, how many times did you shoot? And I had to think, and I go, well, I think I shot 3 times. And, realistically, I ended up shooting 3 times, but I wasn't counting. I wasn't like 1, 2, 3. I was bang, bang, bang. Okay, he stopped doing what he was doing. And then I stopped shooting. So just keep that in mind. The other question was, well, why didn't they shoot the knife out of his hand? Why didn't they shoot him in the leg? We explained that. And then the question that really upset a lot of people and set, a really sour taste in a lot of individuals' mouths were, why'd he have to do it in front of the kids? It's unfortunate that it happened in front of kids. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. but the officer didn't choose to shoot Jacob Blake in front of those kids. Mm-hmm. Jacob Blake chose to get shot in front of those kids. So I just want you to think about that. And I know that might hurt to hear, and I know that it might not sit well, but what I need you to understand is we're trying to give you the facts about what happened during Jacob Blake and remain unbiased in doing so. If you take all of what we said during this podcast and you do the same thing, I'm not going to say we were unbiased this entire time. I said we were trying our best. If you try your best to remain unbiased during this podcast, you take all of the facts, you could cross-reference whatever you want to, you could look up whatever you want to, just make sure that you're doing some cross-referencing to make sure that you have the facts. And ask yourself, why did that happen in front of those kids? Then you should come to the same outcome that we did. And it's Jacob Blake chose that.
Yeah.
Jacob Blake even said in the interview with Michael Strahan, once again, you could go back and listen to it, I shouldn't have picked it up, referring to the knife. He knew he shouldn't have picked it up. He's saying I shouldn't have picked that knife up. And as Ryan said, if you're truly afraid that the officers are there to harm you, to kill you, to beat you up, whatever, then you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that that doesn't happen. Meaning what? I'm not going to fight with the officer, because the more that I fight with the officer, or the more that I resist the officer, the more that he or she can do to me, right? We'll go back to the use of force continuum and Graham versus Connor. If I'm terrified of officers, I'm laying down. My hands are spread. My legs are spread. I'm face down. Go ahead, grab my wrist.
Yep. Don't give me a reason. And so, that's the one thing. And I'm going to end on this note as regards to this deep dive is this is what we know after the whole situation took place, after the whole ordeal. And now that the dust is settled, we already have a lot of damage that we can't repair. We have a lot of damage that we can't repair. And unfortunately, this was a prime case, a prime example of what happens when we go out there and protest too early, or we go out there and we dog people out too early, is because think about that. The officer's family, all that stuff, defamed, and for what he thought was the right thing to do. And if you ask me, it was the right thing. The officer did what he had to do. That's one of those tough decisions that we get into in law enforcement that sometimes we have to make. But now I'm getting defamed because I chose to make a decision to safeguard lives and property and prevent this guy from doing other damage. Let's just say he did get in the car. Let's say he did kidnap those kids. Let's say he did do something to those kids. Who would we be mad then that the officers didn't react to it? So
yeah. And we also have to realize how counterproductive that attitude and mindset is. Meaning, if you are a true advocate for change, I want to bring a positive change to law enforcement, while at the same time making officers realize that there are discrepancies in the way minorities are treated, and so on, then you have to realize that when a situation like this happens, the way that you act could be counterproductive to that mindset. Meaning, when Jacob Blake was shot by the officers, there were so many people outraged. A white officer shot another unarmed black man. He needs to go to jail. We need police reform. And we fast forward months later, when the facts come out, and it's clear video, they zoom in, they show you the suspect, meaning Jacob Blake, even has an interview where he's saying, I really shouldn't have did that. I knew I was under arrest. I should have just laid down and put my hands down. That's what I was going to do. We have to then go, okay, I was wrong. And this is only if you decided to step up and say all these things and share posts and protest. You have to be willing to say, okay, I was wrong. And how do I make that right? Because what happens is police officers are attacked by a police officer doing his job, or for a police officer doing his job, which furthermore divides the two parties. So we have to realize that we can't just, jump on this wagon of, oh, a cop shot another black person, he was unarmed. Like, we have to do our research, and we have to understand that all the facts may not come out until after the investigation.
Absolutely.
And that's for a reason. We've talked about it before. Once again, sorry if I'm being somewhat biased here, but it's because I've seen it. I've seen what it's like for an officer to be attacked for doing the right thing and potentially saving children's lives.
Absolutely.
So just keep that in mind when you're listening to this.
Absolutely. And so I hope you guys got some information and education for this Jacob Blake deep dive. It's unfortunate for Jacob that he was shot, the amount of times. I mean, he's still a dad. He's still a human being. And by no means do I want to, just say, hey, write him off because he made a bad decision. He's still a man. We're all men, and we all, have to deal with our consequences, but it still sucks. It doesn't take that part. He still has a family. And so I don't want to demean him either just because of his actions. But at the same time, we also want to acknowledge, like, look, we have a difficult job to do, like AJ said, and all we want to do is just make sure we're doing it for the right reasons. And so when the dust settles, that's the time to really start to peel back the layers and figure out whether or not the officer's actions were justified or not. So I hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive. What we're going to do really briefly is we're going to do our one has to go. This is going to be pretty good. And so
I'm anxious. I'm anxious for this one. You said it's going to be up there, and I'm already feeling some type of way about Billy right now.
I feel like it's directed at me. That's how I feel.
No, bro, no, not at
he said
all.
No,
not at all. Billy getting ready to quit over here. Shoot,
knock the camera over.
All right. So as I was driving into the studio this morning, I was thinking about, man, what could we do that's kind of everybody eats or everybody knows. So I was like, what better than to do breakfast cereal? So I got 4 breakfast cereals right now, and one of them has to go. All right. Number 1, Frosted Flakes. Number 2, Fruit Loops. Number 3, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And number 4, Captain Crunch.
You didn't even say the best cereal though. Like Fruity Pebbles wasn't even in there.
We could throw Fruity Pebbles on there.
Which one we getting rid of?
So we got 5. So we do 5. So you can get rid of Fruity Pebbles, Captain Crunch, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Frosted Flakes, and Fruit Loops.
I got mine.
Same.
All right.
Billy's like, I am not going first again.
I'll go first. I'll go first. I'm getting rid of Fruit Loops.
Same. Yeah, Fruit Loops got to go.
Bro, the look on Billy's face, bro. The look on Billy's face was just like utter defeat, bro. Like when you said it, he was like,
I didn't expect you guys to agree. I don't think this is a controversial one. I never eat Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yeah, that'd have been my second one.
Yeah.
That'd have been my second. Yeah. That'd definitely been my second one. What would your second one have been?
Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Are you serious?
Yeah, I just don't eat
Yeah.
Frosted Flakes would have been my second one.
No, bro. Frosted Flakes is a staple, bro. Like, you pour some sugar on some Frosted...
Bro, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, bro.
My favorite, Honey Nut Cheerios is like the best. Just, it's kind of plain, classic.
What?
Yeah, it's the best cereal.
Okay, Billy, you're not okay, Billy. Billy, I agree with you for a minute.
You do it to yourself, Billy.
You messed it up, Billy. Like I was with you, Billy.
He's like, I eat the Honey Nut Cheerios because it's good it's healthy for the heart. Have you guys not watched the ads? It's healthy for the heart.
Oh, Billy, what's the checks, like the hard, crunchy, like wheat thins or something like
Kicks.
Huh?
Oh, terrible.
Terrible, yeah.
Terrible.
Oh, horrible.
Billy's like,
didn't
what?
we
That's
have?
good.
Didn't we have a podcast about Frosted Flakes and putting sugar?
Yep.
Frosted traffic stops and Frosted Flakes.
That was like our second one or something like that.
It was, but I just want everybody to know you still put sugar on Frosted Flakes. Okay,
You do.
You got it, Billy.
But I mean, you got Fruity Pebbles,
like,
Cinnamon Toast Crunch, absolutely Captain Crunch, bro. Oops All Berries. Oh, come on now. Come on now.
Not the Oops All Berries.
Yeah, bro. So at least only Frosted Flakes and Fruit Loops.
Did you do Cheerios?
Nah, well, it depends.
Here,
on
let me do it. You said you don't do Cheerios?
You ridiculed me for Honey Nut Cheerios.
Yeah, he just said Honey Nut Cheerios.
I'm talking about normal Cheerios though.
No, that's a no.
Pour some sugar on them.
Nah.
Oh, here we go. Okay,
but that's what Billy just said. He did. That's the ones he likes.
No, he said Honey Nut. I said normal Cheerios.
That's what normal Cheerios is, ain't it?
It's a little sweeter.
No.
Honey Nut Cheerios is a little sweeter.
Yeah, like coated in something.
See, I like the apple cinnamon Cheerios. Like it gotta
those
be.
are good.
Those are good.
Like Apple Jacks.
see, that's that Cali life.
Nah.
Speaking of,
You
did
notice
you
it
see
wasn't on
the
the
picture of
list.
my Asiago bowl, or what's it called?
Your acai bowl. I did see that.
Acai bowl.
Asiago. AJ had an acai bowl for the first time since he was in Cali.
So, just real quick story before we wrap this up. I flew out to Cali because we were putting together our conference. This was 2 or 3 years ago. And, you know, I'm kicking it with Ryan. And Ryan's like, hey, you want an acai bowl? And I'm like,
What?
Bro, what is an acai bowl? He's like, I'm going to get you an acai bowl. Just trust me. So he brings this thing in, and it changed my life. I was like, man, this thing is good.
The one you had, it has to have like the granola, honey, and bananas on it. Like, did you have
It
that?
did. It did. It had bananas, peanut butter. I was told like you gotta get peanut butter. Yeah. So I had bananas, oats, acai, whatever that is. It's purple. It's like purple ice cream. Honey. Did I say banana? It had something else on it.
Strawberries.
Strawberries.
It's so good.
Strawberries and blueberries.
Yeah, everyone go get one. They're amazing.
They are good. They are good. So I didn't think we had them. I thought it was a Cali thing. I was like, oh, okay, Cali. Point for Cali. You know, we've been taking away points for y'all for a while now, but y'all get a point. But we got them out here. We got them out here in Ohio. So they probably everywhere. So everybody go get you an acai bowl. And you sound sophisticated when you say it. Just say it with confidence. Don't say it like I did. Because I went into the shake place. I was like, y'all got Asiago.
Y'all got Asiagos in here? So
they were like, yeah, we got acai bowls.
Oh,
so,
man.
You know what I meant?
Real quick, lastly, before we get off, thank you guys for everybody that's tuning into the podcast. We truly appreciate you. Make sure you guys leave 5-star ratings and 5-star reviews so we can continue to move up in those charts. And other thing, man, shout out to my man, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr. is MLK Day today. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without. He's probably my number one hero / role models, man. So shout out to MLK for what.
And if you haven't been to the monument in DC, you have to.
It's phenomenal.
I mean, it's breathtaking.
Yeah,
it is
phenomenal.
Breathtaking.
It's
so
phenomenal.
Make sure you go check it out.
Yep. So I got a picture in the front of that monument. I got to find it. But anyways, we appreciate you guys. We love you guys, and we'll see y'all next week.
Peace.